After being officially declared dead by United Nations Space Command, John went into hiding after he decided to do so and avoid being found. Even though unofficially he was being tried to be tracked down, but despite that, thanks to his extensive military career and knowledge of the galaxy, he knew which part of the galaxy to avoid when there were major military presence, even with the smaller or even major colonies. But he wanted to find a spot where he could find and spend at least enough time in hiding. But thanks to his knowledge about the galaxy on which planets were occupied, and he knew there are tons of planets that didn't even have any some sort of occupation whatsoever. After a few months of search, he found a small planet in a one star system which didn't have any occupation in according to his memory. And he was there for a whole year. And he actually has planted or placed a small sensor on the planet's moon that will detect any any approach of a ship, even as a civilian or a military. He would even not without a doubt don't hesitate to leave the planet even if this was just a civilian, because he just didn't want to be found. But after being living on this small planet for a year, he never let his guard down. Even though he knew that he is unofficially been that he's still being tracked, and he knew that the United Nations Space Command would have been sending up one of the best teams to find him. Even though there was a big galaxy, there are billions of stars in the galaxy, millions of planets, and even so, he never let his guard down. But after a year, when he was just outside his ship doing some exercise, suddenly a beeping sound happened. That was the sound of the sensor had alerted him of detection of a ship in the outermost part of the star system. But he didn't hesitate because he didn't had to be bothered much else about that. But after being had even heard a sound from the sensor for over a year. But once they did, he didn't hesitate to just go back inside the ship, put on his armor, and he immediately turned on the ship's systems and left. Because even if it was just a small civilian ship, he didn't want to take the risk. But when he left the planet, though, the sensor could immediately on the ship detect it was not even a civilian ship this time. It was a military. And he immediately recognized as to be Five-Star Osiris, one of the best tracker team of that the military could offer. And he knew they were after him. So he decided he had to go fast. But thanks not only to being a military presence of and in service, he was also legendary for his piloting skills. And he managed to avoid being hit by the Five-Star Cyrus weapons all the time. Well, a couple of times they hit his ship's shields, but other than that, he managed to escape. But doing so, he realized he can't outrun them. So he started activating his navigational computer to put in coordinates for the next target, a random destination that he knew they wouldn't have been able to find him. They gave him some time. But as his ship was about to enter the slip space window, Five-Star Osiris fired a number of shots on his ship. Some of them actually hit the main drive, and as his ship entered the slip space, which also led them to leave it after like 15 seconds. And some just after he left it, he immediately looked on the sensor, but there was no planet behind him, and not even Five-Star Osiris ship. It didn't make no sense, considering that he just left the planet was like only a few minutes ago. And 15 seconds in slip space wouldn't be even enough time traveling from the planet not even less than 1 light year. And it did make sense. But he managed to at least realize now he was safe for some reason. But he didn't let his guard down because who knew if 5-star size ship will even show up in any second. But as he was feeling at least a bit relieved, the ship's alarm went off. He decided it was maybe best to land somewhere to have some look at the ancients, or at least the systems, and he managed to discover a small other planet not far from his destination, and he decided that will work enough. So he crash landed on the planet in a dense forest. But even despite this, he had no clue where he was even at. Even after he landed, according to the ship's damage report, it showed that the main drive, the sublight, was damaged beyond repair. And the other systems like the shields, communications, and weapons was still working, but they were not inoperable, meaning that this had to be fixed. But other than that, there was nothing else he could do. At least without the main drive and the sublight, he was stuck on this planet. So if 5-star Cyrus would find him, he will easily be a target. Without the spare parts or the rightful tools, he wouldn't been able to repair the engines at all. But at least he was having a relief of a moment that he wasn't being found. But as he was looking around in the distance, he saw that it was around a dense forest somewhere, all at least from miles as he could see. But according to the computer's navigation, he was not even close to this destination what he was intended to go to. Makes sense. After all, he was only in sleep space for 15 seconds, but that would not even been enough time for even to go to his original destination. But even the navigation said that this planet didn't match any of his ship's database. But if that makes sense to him, he told himself, if this ship doesn't match, if this planet doesn't match the database, perhaps this planet hasn't even been explored yet. And that in sense would actually explains a lot deal for him. So even though that he knew that he was on an unexplored planet and without the ship's main drive without the sunlight, he was stuck. But he decided to just walk around an area to see if there was any sort of habitation of life or maybe even any signs of colonies or anything. But even though the planet wasn't mentioned in the database, it could still be a colony on the planet, even if there's a human. Maybe a group of humans came to the planet to settle down, but never actually reported back to Earth's government about this. And it would not be much a surprise to him, he said to himself. But as he looked around, no signs of colonies or even settlements nowhere. Just forest after forest for miles as he could see it. But he did notice there were a lot of birds, other native life forms like animals, and at least that seems to be him for at least for some sort of relief. But as he was looking around in this forest, it came to him realized food supplies. He went back to his ship and discovered that since he lived on the other planet for a year, his own ship's rations were long gone. But he had put some dry meat in his food as the next ration was supplied, but only for about a week. But luckily for him, since he noticed there were plenty of mammals in the area, And thanks to his skills of hunting after living just one planet for a year, he can easily be found meat. And the other thing that he needed was water. And he did find this small creek not far from the ship that was clean water, and at least now he had water and food supply just in case if something would have happened. And he decided to use the ship as some sort of shelter if there was going to be a bad storm or anything. And after a while, though, he managed to get the shields, weapons, and operational. But unfortunately, the communications was damaged, even though it seems that it was working, but was damaged beyond repair. But it was unlikely he would even going to use the communication in the first place. If he was declared officially dead by the government and the military, so why would he even use the communication to even send out an SOS message, knowing that the five-star scientists would use that signal to able track him down and execute him? So, but at least that was problem though. But as the time went on, John decided to explore more distant areas around the ship, just to make some just a basic understanding where he could be and if he could find any traces of any people, aliens, or basically any intelligent life forms. But he walked maybe as far up to 2 to 5 miles around the ship area, but still no signs of any activity of any settlements, no matter what it is. But he was still wondering though, if there was anyone else on the planet. But as the one day when he was out walking after almost 5 miles in one direction, almost like east of his camp, he noticed this young woman, a human, in a distance. Now he at least know that is someone else on the planet, unless he was seeing things. But he assured himself he didn't see anything other than a real person. But he saw that she was wielding something. Looked like a sword. But a laser sword is one type of technology that he has never even come across before. Considering that he has been in the Human Covenant War for a number of years, and in other battles before then, and even after, but never has seen any alien or even other human colonists, or even never heard of any activities with the military research departments back on Earth developing such technology. So he wondered, what kind of weapon is that? But as he was looking at her, she spotted him. She immediately ran up to him, holding the weapon almost towards his chest, but only like a few inches from the blade to hit the armor. She demanded to know who he is, but for some reason, he couldn't even understand a single word for her. At first, he maybe thought she was talking in some sort of top secret code or something, or a coded language. Wouldn't be much a problem, wouldn't it be much as a secret. He knew that the military use code words from different situations. So if they had to develop a coded language, wouldn't be much unheard of. But she demanded to know, but still no answer. But then she pointed on his head, meaning remove the helmet, even though he was trained not to do so. But what else he could do? Because he's seen this laser sword can easily cut down through a tree and a rock. So without a doubt, it would cut through his armor with ease. So he applied. He removed his helmet, and as she looked at him, somehow her face looked from anger to at least confusion. But then she backed off a bit, but still holding the weapon against him. She demanded to know who he is, once again in the language that he couldn't understand. But as they were just staring at each other, John noticed this mechanical life form was walking up to them, a humanoid robot, speaking the same language as she did. And she explained to this robot that she found this man, but he had no idea who he is. Then he tried to explain his language. John, John. And this young woman then looked at him and realized that this was actually his name. And even so, a lot of things actually had changed. She turned off this weapon, and he was amazed. A small, maybe like 10, almost 15-inch long metallic cylinder or pipe or something was holding the blade and was disappeared. Then he wondered, what kind of weapon is that? But he tried to communicate with us again, and she pointed at herself and she pointed herself and said, Jamiri. Jamiri was her name. John tried to understand the language, but as he tried to talk, both this robot and Jamiri looked at each other. The robot said maybe that he was from a planet that basically didn't understand the language, or at least didn't speak the standard galaxy language. But then she pointed to make him to follow. And what other option he did? He could take off, but he could run after him and use the weapon against him. So he was an disadvantage on that one. So he obliged. He followed her to a small camp. He noticed there was a small ship, and even though it was almost like his own, but he had never seen this type of ship before. So they both sit down, and this robot sit down next to them and offer them some drinks and some food. But he first believed that maybe he was a prisoner. But then he realized he wasn't strained, and this robot offered him a meal and a drink. So why would that do for a prisoner? So as she tried to talk to him again, but this time no understanding. But the robot tried again to talk to John, but eventually it couldn't even understand either. But as the time went on, John decided it was maybe time for him to leave. But as he stood up, she still sit there. He tried to explain by sign language, that he's walking to his ship. That's something that she might have understood because she just nodded and just walked off. A couple of days later, he came back to her camp. She was a bit happy to see him because this time she didn't run up to him. She just waved to him, but even though this robot told her just to be careful, what if this was one of those soldiers that was looking for her? But she shook her head that it was not the case. And after a couple of weeks of this visitation from each other, John and Bird began to understand this language. What it turns out to be was named Galactic Standard Basic. And she understood his language. And eventually, then he got understanding to know what she is and what weapon she was wielding. And the name of the robot was a droid. But she realized telling him, after telling about this organization that he served, doesn't even make sense to her because she never heard of it. And then the same thing about the order that she served, never heard of. And when she used this called the Force, despite his travels in the galaxy for years, he has never come across anyone or even an organization that used so-called the Force, a mythical power. But despite this, he was very surprised at this. He was curious, wanted to know more, but after he came to realize that this galaxy he was in, it wasn't his home galaxy. He must have traveled to a faraway galaxy, even though it was just a 15 seconds long slip space travel. But the only explanation is that when five-star Cyrus fired about his ship, caused it to somehow make a rift. in space and time continue to send him to all different galaxies, but also to an ultimate dimension kind of way. That was something that he didn't expect to even was possibility. But he knew to himself like Cortana or his old friend Catherine Halsey might have agreed on him. But as time went on, John started to get to like her a bit to like Jamiri more, understanding the organization that she was once served. Well, she learned when he learned this that she was just one time was fighting a war, a galaxy-wide war, Clone Wars. And that's the reason when she explained to him why she attacked them when the first time he saw her. She couldn't understand believe first that she first believed that John was one of those clone troopers. She explained they were soldiers look identical. She first believed maybe he was a clone trooper but just a new armor. But when she saw his face, it didn't even look like any remotely as those clone troopers. She even showed him an holopad what those how the drones looks like. And he could understand why. But over time, he actually started to like Jamiri even more. But he knew that his ship wouldn't be able to leave the planet, but her could. So one day, he asked her if he could stay on the planet Elicit Hurricane, and she said yes. So he went back and destroyed his own ship to leave this nothing left behind. So one day, when they were just talking, suddenly this holopad on the ship activated. It sent a signal showing that said the Galactic Empire's no more. Galaxy safe, replaced with New Republic. First, Jamiri was happy, but then hesitated to even to believe this, because this was the first news she even had heard in a several years from the outside galaxy. So she decided not to fall for this. She first maybe believed this was some sort of propaganda. Maybe that she told her droid, maybe this was the Empire's another attempt to withdraw any surviving Jedi's, which they call themselves, which John later found out, and kill them. But so another for a number of years, she learned that another Jedi survivor or Jedi by the name Luke Skywalker had rebuilt the Jedi Order on Yavin 4 and sent out a message to any survivors willing to come forward to join his new order to rebuild it, to bring peace and balance back into Force and the galaxy once again. Even though that John and her droid tried to convince her maybe this wasn't a real message. Because John said he has a feeling that this could have been the real deal. So they agreed to go there. But John said if this was a trap, he would try to defend her even if it meant he had to sacrifice his own life. But when they showed up, Yahweh Forge, they landed outside this great temple and they saw a number of people, humans and non-humans, aliens, wielding lightsabers, different colors. They were approached by the same man who was in the message that she received, Luke Skywalker. She was actually at the time already a Jedi Knight before the time of by the end of the Clone Wars. So she was fully trained. She was actually offered as a teacher job, or like teach new apprentice. But over time, John decided maybe it was time for him to go. But she convinced him to stay by telling him she was in love with him. After all, she had been learned to taught that the attachments for love was forbidden, for totally forbidden within the Jedi Code. But Luke had told her the new Jedi Code that he encouraged dating, relationships, even marriage among his own students. So she did. So eventually, John and Jamiri actually got married. He was also a little bit disappointed that he wasn't force sensitive, but he decided to remain with the Jedi Order along his wife. Eventually, they have at least two daughters, twins, both force sensitive, and also when the twins were like 4 years old, they even had another child, a boy, also force sensitive. But like the daughters and the son, they had both strong connection to the force, but also had inherited their father's pilot skills. John was actually happy to have found a new life, not a military life for once, but finding his true love, especially with the young woman Jamiri. Jamiri was really happy to have found her new life as well, as the galaxy was now rid of the Empire. And this is how John and Jamiri found the true love that they found together. The end.